Hello everybody, welcome. I had a dream. I've had many dreams, even some visions occasionally. I know the difference. Which, I can't say that I'm a visionary, but I've had a couple of visions. And I definitely know the difference between that and a dream. A vision, for me anyway, my experience of them, they happen during a very specific time in which my mind was in an unusual array of ways. And both times, it was in the daytime, and suddenly out of nowhere I had to lie down, and the moment I lay down, in a kind of dreaming experience that's unusually local, very local, feels like it's right here. And then I see features of the people who are coming to my home. In one case, a doctor. I should have understood those symbols. In one case, a doctor who I'd never seen before. And in another case, a helper. In both cases, I saw effectively specific features of their situation in life that I could not have otherwise possibly have known that were accurate. I'm not saying this to take any credit. This is not the kind of thing I could reproduce at will. It's not like I have a skill necessarily or I have a gift. It's more like, under unusual conditions where the stakes are very high and consciousness is still somewhat coherent, right? So it's like a high stress situation, perhaps. Other forms of sensing arise in our direct experience, and yes, of course, it's a problem. Why is it a problem? Because most of the time we're in an ordinary mode of mind, which, let's be really clear, is mostly shut down, right? If you have 70 senses, in your ordinary mode of mind, you've got 4, maybe 6. In your ordinary mode of mind, you'll see from one perspective, one array of values, one or maybe 2 purposes at most. In a non-ordinary situation, it's almost the opposite. You'll see, for 7 reasons from 5 perspectives, 19 purposes. You don't have to know what each one is either. You just naturally have an increased dimensionality. And how is that increased dimensionality expressed? It's expressed symbolically, right? So the doctor was depicted as a short man with a cast on his left forearm, a shaggy dog behind a curtain in a small room. The doctor turned out to be unusually short. maybe 4'8", 4'9". He did not have a cast on his left arm. But at home, it turned out, he had, in fact, a shaggy dog that was often in his office, which is a small room behind a curtain in his home. Now, of course, you're listening to this in the future of my experience, and there's no evidence. I can't provide evidence that what I experienced in my visionary trance is what I am saying it is. This is my honest recollection about that event. There were a couple of other features, because it's so long ago I can't remember. It was a very similar situation with the helper, in which I accurately described her partner and knew symbolically some things about him that were definitely pertinent, to the degree that she laughed and thought, like, that's hilarious, how could anyone know this? Because she understood the symbols as well. One of them was a very shiny bowler hat, but I cannot recall why she thought that was perfect and important. It's a long time ago. So, we have a reasonable concern about what we call delusions, and we have a reasonable concern about insanity. The way we make sense of our own identity and its relationship to the world is actually a fairly delicate arrangement of inhibitions. Right? And this delicate arrangement of inhibitions gets forged half intentionally, half accidentally. Of course, it's not a 50-50 thing, but partly intentionally, partly accidentally, partly for coping, partly for play, partly for compliance, partly to fulfill various narratives or expectations. This interface of self and world, and self to world, and world to self. This interface is very complicated. We have a thing called we could call a private face, which is what we see to ourselves if we really look carefully, openly. And then we have various layers of other faces. Closest companions, parents, more distant companions but close, and so forth, on out to strangers, and then on out to possible strangers, and out from there to the world itself, or some nation, or some cohort, a religion, a political party, some faction of humans that share who knows what strange biases, imperatives, predilections, insanities, fictions, beliefs, faiths, sciences, who knows, right? But you can see how complex it is, because, for example, if we're at all interested in science, then we have a face that faces science inside us, right? Where we see ourselves from a scientific face. If we have a face that knows a little bit about medicine, then that face faces us inwardly. We decide, like, am I sick? Do I have a fever? Right? We're using a very special aspect of consciousness when we do this, and we're collapsing the entire range of consciousness into one of its possible modes, right? The mode of doctor, am I sick? Which we have modeled. How have we modeled this? By seeing doctors portrayed, perhaps by being cared for by them, by being cared for by parents or other elders, possibly by being cared for by siblings, possibly by caring for siblings, friends, elders in situations where there's trouble, right? So, when people are saying like, I wonder what consciousness is, I wonder if they're fucking thinking about consciousness. What are they thinking about? They're not thinking about consciousness because that stuff is so complex. It's the thing they're asking the question with, right? So if we have a science-facing self and a medicine-facing self and a psychology-facing self and a myth-facing self, all these inside us, right? And never mind what we face outside in what we can at least imagine as cohorts that might observe and evaluate us. They might ignore us. They might, this is the stuff. That is the stuff that stung me when I was little. I wonder if it's a nettle. Just touched this plant and it stung me. I wonder what that is. So, think about how sophisticated your persona is. It's ordinarily in a superposition of states. We might say, transferring a metaphor from quantum mechanics, right? It's not this or that. It's not you or not you, right? It's in a superposition of states. And then something acquires your attention and it begins to collapse to towards 2 or 3 of them at the same time. Comedian, athlete, physical, keep walking, right? Race car driver, avoid that wreck. Naturalist, what's that plant, animal, bird, insect, etc. That plant stung me good. See, it's really, okay, now look at what just happened, all right? I started talking about playing the doctor. And what's the next thing that happened? I got stung by a plant. And that's actually what took place. And so I'm sitting here, part of my finger is stinging. It's a little bit blotchier than it probably should be. Doesn't look like a rash yet. And I'm collapsing my faculties toward checking the severity of the situation, right? I'm evaluating is this, how severe is this? Does it need attention? Am I okay? Is it going to bubble up into little pustules like when I was a kid and was playing in this stuff one day with my friend Mark? But anyway, my point is, within us, to some degree, to a unique degree, and to different degrees in different situations and times of our lives, we collapse the manifold of our identity, intelligence, awareness, consciousness, emotion, sensation. And then as it collapses and becomes highly structured and specialized, an action ensues, right? I lift my finger and carefully examine the place where it stings, for example, or I formulate this sentence that I am speaking right now. Do you see how pervasive this little toy is? So we're doing this all the time, but we don't think that way. We think, well, I know who Darren is. He's a coherent array of habits that I'm well familiar with. In fact, to be entirely honest, no one, with the possible exception of divine beings or so forth, no one is as familiar with Darren as I am. I am the one who experiences Darren and also enacts him. So I would think I know everything that's going on, but I don't, because I think I'm one guy, and there's nothing like that going on. If you painted a label on a blurry waterfall of states, right? You just paint you sculpt some word in steel, cold. You put it behind the waterfall. Okay. The waterfall may indeed be cool. Might even be cold. But that doesn't help anyone. And that's kind of what we do. We think, I am a me. It's not untrue, and it's most of our experience. But what happens when enough of the me disappears that the more than merely me can arise, signal, dance, express itself, see, know, feel, show? Right? What happens then? The more than merely me. Well, here's a couple things that happen. Art, medicine, science, heroism, war, sports, music, dance, speech, sex, rescue. All kinds of things happen from the more than merely me. And so, normally, we like our normalcy because it feels safe and predictable and comfortable. We think, oh, I know what's going on, quote unquote. Good luck with that. That's a convenient fiction. If anything serious happened, whether it was seriously beautiful, seriously puzzling, or seriously violent, you would quickly realize that the mind with which you're comfortable is almost useless and more like a prison than a sanctuary. Because sanctuary, and yeah, I'm thinking about Logan's Run right here, straight up. Sanctuary exists, but it's not a place. It's a way of being human, facing ourselves, with others facing us, facing others, facing the world with the world facing us, facing the sky with the sky facing us. It's a way of authentically opening the valves, so to speak, on the puzzle box in which our awareness, consciousness, identity, expectations, emotions, sensations are usually trapped. And that box necessarily represents, I don't know, like fucking 2/100ths of our nature and natural ability, our needs, our senses, our faculties, our ways of seeing and knowing and learning, growing, playing, healing, remembering. That last one might be the most important. I had a dream that I was in a prison where a friend of mine is in prison. And then I woke up and it seemed like, it wasn't too tough in the prison situation. Things were okay in there, actually. Wasn't a lot of danger, bad people, or anything like that. It was just very constrained, right? A couple times in the dream I got a little bit nervous. And then I woke up and I thought, oh, I'm not in a prison now. That's nice. I didn't actually think that. I just thought, I can remember the dream. Actually, that's what I actually thought. I was excited because I could remember features of the dream. And then I listened to a podcast. Well, various things happened, but I ended up walking around listening to a podcast called Third Eye Drops. And it was something like the ancients knew how to escape the simulation. Now, I want to kind of blur that word simulation because it conjures computational contexts and structures, right? So I want to blur that word. What do I want to call it? It's not actually a simulation, it's a... well, I don't know what it is, first of all. But my experience of it resembles a complex array of obfuscating lenses that, when reality shines through them, lead to lesser stases or hypostases that don't present things that are merely illusory. They're not merely illusory. Nor are they necessarily a simulation like a machine would make. And even if they were, they'd have to be simulations of something. Of something. Right? So I think simulation is the wrong word. We need a much better word. Hypostasis isn't bad. How can we illustrate what... Okay. We illustrate what a hypostasis is, though. It's an actual metaphor. Come on, universe. There's a mountain in the world, and there's a representation of the mountain on the map. And then there's the representation of the intersection between the mountain on the map and the mountain in our mind. Right? So there's actually, the last one is, the intersection is between the mountain in the world, the mountain on the map, and the mountain in our mind. Right? That's a specific intersection. So the mountain on the map is a hypostasis. The mountain in the mind is a very strange thing indeed, and it's not merely a hypostasis. It makes use of both features. The hyperstasis, which is probably the universe. I mean, the hyperstasis looks crazy. It's a tunnel. It's got like origin, universe, galaxies, solar systems, this solar system, this star, this Earth, this moon, then, planetary topology local to Earth, then the actual planetary topologies of Earth at this moment, and whatever, in a timeline. I mean, yeah, the hyperstasis is very complex. The problem is, it's almost always useful to have new dimensions in which one can see, sense, know, learn, test, play, reflect, understand, metaphorize, to metaphorize. It's often good to have more dimensions, but you need coherent. We need coherent introduction of dimensions, which is something dreaming usually does to some degree. And some forms of cognitive or intellectual or philosophical pursuit are similar. The podcast I was listening to on Third Eye Drops was revealing some unusually discussed information about Plato's allegory of the cave in, I think, The Republic. And the host had some interesting stuff to share. But what the host was saying, which is something most people who know about the cave allegory are at least familiar with, is that We're trapped in a kind of a reduced dimensionality sensorium. And the dimensionality it's not an inescapable situation. The problem is that compared to what we're used to seeing, what's actually going on is terrifyingly profound, beautiful, momentous, and so forth. So we tend to stay tethered up in the packaged goods version of existence. And no one would say they would want that. I wouldn't say I want that. By the way, my finger's fine. There's the doctor coming back online for a moment. Just checking in on my finger that got stung. Right? Consciousness collapsing to one of its modes. Well, what if we could collapse consciousness into 3 to 5 modes at the same time instead of one? That's what children do. That's what brilliant humans do. That's probably what gods do. Pretty sure if there are aliens, they're doing it. Spirit beings, yep, they're up to that for sure. Trees, probably doing that. Fish, bet they're doing it. You know, the sky, pure doing of that. The sky is like, yeah, I'm stars and galaxies, and black holes and quasars, and nebula, starbirth nurseries, neutron stars, and Jupiters. So there's like, yeah, not like one thing. I mean, it's obviously time-space is a meta position, superposition over the whole category of identities we have down here. And the problem is, really, that you don't want... Okay, once you start being presented with symbolic information, unless you have a coherent sort of what? I guess I'm going to be kind of clinical. Unless your observation body is coherent, you're going to go nuts. And the symbols themselves are not always coherent. You know, like the whole situation, you're talking about an interface between, I don't know, a whole bunch of stuff. The history of life on Earth, minds, the between of the self and the world and the universe and the sky and so forth, that between, and where these two things overlap. And let's face it, they're the same thing. So if they're overlapping, what's happening? They're folding back on each other, right? So if your consciousness is focused out into the world, what it's doing is it's folding back onto its own origin. Can you see that? When you're doing the naturalist thing and you're watching the dolphins or whatever, you're folding back your awareness right onto your own origin. And this produces feedback in awareness, like bubbling waves, right? Like a sort of a place where a wave meets a wave kind of thing. So you see the flowers and you think, oh, it's beautiful, right? It's a recursion. You're seeing, I mean, you're seeing like 9 different things at least, probably a billion or endless numbers, infinite things. But light is the reason you're able to see it all. So you're seeing light, right? And you're also seeing with light. So you are the light, seeing the flowers. The flowers are, sensing the light, reflecting off you. They don't have to have eyes. They have, cellular hyperstructure. So do the trees. The flowers are probably fast. The trees are a little slower. Everything senses everything in light and, electromagnetism and so forth. Some materialists will argue, well, the effects of the sensing are so tiny. I know, but the problem is that when things get really tiny, they get really weird. So let's, keep both things in mind and not just say like, well, the effects are, vanishingly small. Vanishingly small turns out to be, whoops, superpositions. Whoops, black holes or whatever. Anyway. So you have this problem of not going nuts, or of going nuts and then trying to sort of tune the 3 or 4 different dials you need to tune to produce coherent feedback, right? From that recursive interaction at the membrane of the interface, at the boundary of the interface, and whatever you think of as the interface, right? Whether it's your physical vision or the surface of your skin or the electromagnetic boundaries put out by the fields your body produces as a complex cellular hyperstructure, however minute those fields might seem to our measuring machines. So guess what? There's a feature of consciousness like the doctor or the philosopher, which isn't merely the psychologist, though the psychologist is probably involved if we're doing this well. Perhaps the counselor and the therapist and the priest and the seer woman and the saint and the witch and so forth, they are in us, and they can face ourselves from within us, right? They are in us, all those things, because it's not just what you've seen portrayed in your life, though that may have colored what's in you. It's what you brought to human birth in the lineage of, your particular 873,421 ancestors, or, and nurture, right, what you grew, the context you grew up in, and nature herself, the library that's beyond your ancestors that you draw your being from, this world and so forth. This world would produce all of the different modes of awareness that we humans are, know of and speak of in our catalog of, madman, author, philosopher, child, father, mother, grandmother, grandfather, hunter, warrior, athlete, dramatist, poet, actress, singer, musician, magician, wizard, witch, shaman, scientist, naturalist, psychologist, mathematician, engineer. All of these things. The world naturally produces all these things. So all these things, they are, the world is more than them. The world is the hyperstasis of these modes, right? And all these modes are in us. Few of us will experience the broad array of them. And we'll probably, many of us at least, we will have a experience of some we don't like. The patient, the injured one, the victim, the target, scapegoat. The rejected one, the criminal, the bad person, the outcast, the insane person, the broken person, all these things. We will have some experience of that array, and it will change in different times in our lives. Hopefully, we don't just get stuck in one or two, especially if they're very dark. So, it's funny, the people next to me are talking about a very similar topic. Right? Dog is simultaneously trying to get at the geese and sneezing, which is its body trying to interrupt it being triggered by the geese. It's having two conflicting Two very strong conflicting triggers at the same time. One sort of a little more psycho-emotional but very physical. Eat the goose, chase the goose, get the goose. And the other one, don't kill the animal, don't run away from the human. Don't become, you don't need to kill the animal. Or something, who knows what's in there. But it's making it sneeze. Right? And dogs often sneeze to interrupt triggers. Or so I've heard. So, of all the kinds of modes that we can have inside us, there's one that oversees the coherence of the entire system. And that one's job is to determine if we've gone batshit crazy or if we're having actual, trustworthy, non-ordinary experience. Because most forms of crazy resemble or feel like non-ordinary experience, and it's hard not to trust them because it's our experience. So we use the thing we see with. We see because of the thing we see with. The thing we see with casts a sort of a light on our experience, and that light is interpretive. And when it's coherent, non-ordinary sensing is very natural to human beings. When it's incoherent, or there's a lot of stress, or there's a lot of pain, or there's an overarching narrative, or one is being negatively evaluated by others, which is a stress, of course, then the coherence breaks down. There's all kinds of things that can break the coherence down. Sometimes the coherence never forms. And sometimes we can sort of adjust the dials, right? Like, imagine you have something a bit like an equalizer on a stereo or piece of musical gear or recording device, right? You've got an equalizer with, say, who knows what, 12 bands or something. We could say 6 for ease. Most of them have 3, right? Treble, mid, and bass. So you could equalize the forces of flow in awareness, in the mind, in the inner eye with which you interpret, with which you are both facing yourself and facing the world, and with which the world is facing you. It's not an accident that one of the most commonly produced images, well, that's not true, a very commonly produced image and a trope of schizophrenia, which is probably an outdated term at this point and far too broad to effectively discuss states of awareness, is simply a single eye looking, right? A single eye, a picture of a single eye. They draw this commonly. And all of us do. I mean, many of us have. I certainly have drawn, when I was little, just a single eye, in the middle of a pyramid or triangle or whatever, right? We even have some structure resembling that on our money, I think, at least the $1 bill maybe. But yeah, this is a thing to be observed from without, evaluatively observed, or observed from without by a disembodied thing, right? Like a machine or a robot or a camera or Facebook or Google or Sears, whatever, whatever corporation is interested in getting inside your little identity structure and dragging some loyalty out of you, momentary or long-term. It really is as if we're in a sea of demons trying to get us to worship them. And money is one of the substitutes for worship. Money is the worship commodity around here. Anyway, my point is just that there's a feature of the mind that looks at consciousness's structure, features, activity, results, and decides, am I okay or not, right? Am I still in my, quote, right mind, unquote. And now we've looped back and we're going to start producing feedback against the first topic, which is, okay, when you look out at the world, it's a wave hitting a wave, right? It's the world as a wave, the world is waving, it's making light, bodies, animals, humans, food, all these things, right? And you are the world and you're looking back at the world. So where those two things intersect, there's going to be feedback, that roiling wave phenomenon. You're going to have the same thing happen if you look at consciousness with consciousness. It's going to produce feedback, just like an electric guitar is, when you take the pickups and put them near the speaker, it's going to start squealing. Unless, there's mechanisms to stop it or whatever.
Bye, Mom.
When humans who've long been separated first are reunited and they hold each other in esteem and are happy, you'll hear them laughing and raising their voices and the tone of their voices. Feedback, right? When they're departing, just as those people were, same thing. Bye. Raise your voice, wave your hands. It's feedback. It's a wave. Literally wave your hands. So when you look at consciousness with consciousness, it's going to produce feedback. Now you really have a problem because you're trying to determine, you've got one aspect of consciousness, the sort of overseer, in a way. Not in the bad sense. The one who checks to see if you're okay, mainly. So you got this overseer dude or chick or whatever looking at the flow of consciousness and remarking on it, analyzing it, testing it, checking it. Well, that's going to produce feedback right away. You're going to have a lot of trouble with that. Now, most of the time it works fairly well because its job isn't too tough. With ordinary consciousness, it's not too hard to do a state check and come away with a green light, right? But once you start having non-ordinary experiences of consciousness, unless you have practice and you know something about the strange way in which awareness and consciousness resemble a kind of a living water, right? If you know something about that, you've got a better shot. If you don't, what will happen is the shapes in the waves, the shapes in the feedback will overwhelm you. You will identify with them. You'll take them seriously. You'll take them literally. You'll take them hyperconnectively or synchromistically. And that's when you're going to get into trouble. Now, there are kind of...
remind myself out of my rental car here. The other side.
There's a sort of a pareidolia, right, which is the inclination to see figures in flowing, changing shapes like the grain in wood or the bark on a tree or the color differentials in quartz, the inclusions in quartz. Those things form the suggestions of shapes. And when consciousness examines consciousness and produces feedback, it's like this, right? It does this. And, that interaction, if it decoheres just a little bit, will slip toward paranoia or megalomania or both. And some other, mania, paranoia, megalomania, hypercreativity.
How much was it when we bought it? 350? No, hold on, no. 400 for...
There are many different modes of madness, and there's a whole range of this kind of phenomenon in consciousness that isn't bad or malignant. It won't get you killed. I've seen it in a number of people. They're in a sort of what we might think of as a manic state, but there's There's authentic, something resembling authentic prophetic awareness. And this is a huge problem because you can have both things going on. You can have the person is in the grip of a series of narratives and they're having authentic prophetic awareness at the same time. They have escaped the prison, outside the prison world of ordinary mind. They are not merely batshit crazy, and they're learning, they're sort of like a bird on its first flight. They're learning how to see with the 7 other eyes of the self and the soul. Right? And it doesn't have to be 7, I'm just using that like 9, 13, whatever you like. The many other eyes of the soul. And normally what happens among the ordinary humans is the ordinary humans just shut it down. They don't know how to relate with that at all. They have no protocols for that. So they just shut them down. This usually ends in hospitalization, drugging, self-harm, accident, all kinds of things. So we want, most of us, we want some degree of non-ordinary. We want to get a little bit out of the prison and we don't want to go insane. Well, if you're going to go to it, right, if you're a person who's lived in the desert your entire life and you decide, like, I really want to go swim in the ocean, you don't just go jump, from an airplane into the open sea. You learn about the ocean, you learn about the water, you learn about currents and how to solve various problems that will certainly arise when you encounter the actual ocean. That'll throw you around, sink you, trap you, drown you, eat you. You learn about these things, right? And it's the same with consciousness. Over time, you will naturally, as long as you don't go completely nuts or burn your mind with either drugs or trauma, or both, and those things can burn patterns into the flow that are not helpful and can be lethally terrible. You can sort of crack the membrane in such a way that the crack tends to persist over time. With drugs, with trauma, sometimes just with probably DNA, heredity, maybe. Nature and nurture, toxins are also trauma. So it's dangerous terrain, and
so if you are not like prepared, you need. I mean, I've found so many times.
So, it's not the kind of thing where you want to just go messing about with it. And this is mostly what happens with young people and with older people. They mess about rather unskillfully, using drugs and adventurism and so forth. Huge problem. Dreaming is the near-at-hand doorway to probably everything you can hope for in terms of getting outside the prison. It's a natural deprisoning process, right? And it's a living process. That happens to most of us with great regularity. It's rich. It decollapses the mode of identity and consciousness. It's very profound. And that is another self-facing aspect of awareness, right? The dreaming aspect. It doesn't face the world. Well, maybe it does in a way. Maybe it mirrors the world rather than facing it. But it's self-facing inwardly. But we can achieve something not dissimilar in what we think of as ordinary consciousness as well. And to some degree, by talking of these matters, by considering them in consciousness, in our awareness, we are already beginning to step just a little bit outside the prison of ordinary thought without going all the way to madness, you see. And talking about some of the dangers that we may encounter when we depart the extremely stultifying predictability, normalcy of our habitual state of mind. Somebody playing the violin. If we move from one of the specific modes of self-facing awareness, consciousness, intention, purpose, one of the forms, even if I move away from the Darren form just toward the human or the organismal or the being or the planet or the sky or the tree, if I move away, then the field becomes rich. Very rich inside it, with ways of seeing that aren't trapped, like my mind often is. It's when I am shrunk down to Darren, and I'm worried about my worries, and identity seems concrete, explicit, given by circumstances, structured, compelling, continuous. Patrick McGowan's old TV series, highly experimental, called The Prisoner. It's hilarious. This old TV series, it's kind of about this problem. It's the problem of folding consciousness or awareness back upon its origins. And look, this is what physicists do. This is what philosophers do. This is what children do. Mothers are doing this. The sky is doing this. The world is doing this. This is the doing of all things. They're doing this. They're being this process. Or we can get trapped in a backwater, so to speak, of the labyrinth of feedback that results from recursion in the between of consciousness and being. And if we direct consciousness at itself, which is effectively what we usually mean when we say the words meditation. This is kind of what we mean. We mean to become observant of kind of the surface of the water of the mind from above it, right? And long observation of that will give us the skills, naturally, to not lose our way if we should suddenly find ourselves outside the prison, or if the prison should start to dissolve, so to speak. We won't panic. We'll remember, yes, this is just the dissolution of the walls. It's always interesting. It's very commonly like this. These features are familiar from what I've experienced in just observing my own mind and how it transforms from a modal thing to its potential state of potential, and even the potential can half fade into origin. And some will say, why are you saying half? And I'll say, because I said half. Yeah, so you have origin, potential, and just tiny little bubbles of structure on the surface that can fade away. Now identity is gone. Now perhaps no more symbols either. Enlightenment, the living light in awareness of its own origin and nature. But to get there, I've not got there. I've walked in that direction. Some. So I've learned a little tiny bit about the water and the eddies and the currents and the character of the situation. We are born to see outside the prison. We start from outside the prison and we walk into it and build it up on purpose as we are instructed to do by our peers, parents, culture, history, language, thrisps of various kinds, isms. And then, because we are so familiar with it, we get married to it. We get stuck in it. The spider's web is supposed to extend its sensorium and world line. If our minds were like this, they do naturally. But our minds can become a trap in that we get stuck on features of the web that we made, and we confuse those features with ourselves, with our identity or our situation and so forth. I am home. I will rest. Thank you for joining me. I wish you a very beautiful way and day and dreams, seeing. I look forward to learning together again sometime soon. Bye-bye for now.